The room fell silent as I slid the hidden financial documents across the table. "You've stolen over $200,000 from us," I said, watching the HOA president's face drain of color. "After Hurricane Elena destroyed our community, they demanded each homeowner pay $8,000 for roof repairs, despite collecting our insurance premiums for years. They never expected my late mother had been secretly documenting their fraud all along, or that her grieving daughter would use those records to trap them at their own meeting. When they threatened to fine me and cut off my utilities, they had no idea they were building the perfect case against themselves. Here's how I exposed an HOA insurance scam that was stealing from 150 families, and how you can protect yourself from happening to you. When Hurricane Elena tore through coastal Palms last September, I inherited a mess. My mother's beachfront condo had been in our family for 15 years. I lived 3 states away with a demanding job that kept me from visiting as often as I should have. My phone rang at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was Mrs. Delgado, Mom's neighbor for over a decade. "They're telling everyone they have to pay for their own roof repairs." Her voice shook with anger. "The HOA board is having an emergency meeting tomorrow. They're saying our insurance doesn't cover hurricane damage. You need to come quick." At first, I thought she was confused. Maybe there was a deductible issue or some paperwork mistake, but Mrs. Delgado wasn't one to exaggerate. The Coastal Palms HOA has been collecting an extra $175 monthly from each unit specifically for the hurricane insurance pool. For years, I threw clothes in a suitcase and drove straight to Florida, breaking speed limits the whole way. 5 hours later, I turned onto the palm-lined entrance to Coastal Palms. The familiar path felt different now. The peaceful seaside community was interrupted by the cacophony of temporary repairs. Blue tarps covered damaged roofs as residents tried to prevent further water damage. As I crested the hill overlooking the community, my heart sank. What had once been a picturesque row of peach-colored condos now looked like a disaster zone. Workers in hard hats moved around like ants, carrying materials and taking measurements. A large sign stood near the clubhouse. "Emergency OA meeting, 7 p.m. mandatory attendance." I parked my car and walked toward a woman standing apart from the workers. She wore spotless white pants and a crisp blue blouse, despite the dusty surroundings. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she held a clipboard while talking on her phone. "Excuse me," I said when she finished her call. "What's happening here with the roof repairs?" She looked me up and down like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting her day. "We're assessing damage costs to distribute to homeowners." Her voice was practiced and smooth. Victoria Winters, Coastal Palms HOA president. She extended her hand without warmth. "This doesn't make sense," I said, ignoring her handshake. "My mother's unit has been paying into the hurricane insurance fund for years. Margaret Davidson's unit, Building C." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There must be some misunderstanding. Our master policy has exclusions for named hurricanes. Each owner is responsible for their own unit's exterior damage. It's clearly outlined in the bylaws amendment from last year." "That's impossible. My mother would have told me about such a significant change. She kept meticulous records." "Perhaps she didn't understand the implications." Victoria sounded almost sorry for me. "The change was approved during last year's annual meeting. Every owner received documentation." My mind raced. Mom had been in declining health last year, but her mind remained sharp. She wouldn't have missed something this important without telling me. Something wasn't right. "I need to see those documents," I demanded. "You're welcome to contact our management company." Victoria handed me a business card. "But I assure you everything is in order. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have a disaster to manage." She turned away, already dialing another number on her phone. I stood there feeling helpless as residents surveyed their damaged homes, worry etched on their faces at the unexpected financial burden that had just landed on them. Back at Mom's condo, Mrs. Delgado waited on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and a worried expression. "They started making these claims right after the hurricane hit," she explained. "Your mother would be furious. She served on the board years ago and fought hard for that hurricane coverage." "Did Mom mention any bylaw changes about insurance last year?" I asked. "Never. Margaret was adamant about maintaining comprehensive coverage. She even questioned Victoria at a meeting last spring about increasing our coverage limits. That's when the arguments started." "Arguments?" Mrs. Delgado's eyes watered. "Victoria and her friends on the board didn't like being questioned. The day before your mother went into the hospital for the last time, she was looking through her files, said she needed to find something important about the insurance policy. She kept saying they were trying to pull something shady. Mom's home office remained untouched since her death 3 months ago. I hadn't had the heart to go through her things during my brief visit for the funeral. Now I needed answers. The small room smelled of her favorite lavender candles and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stuffed with community photo albums, board meeting minutes, and decades of careful records. Mom tracked everything: maintenance requests, policy changes, financial statements, all written in her neat handwriting. Where would she have kept insurance records? The filing cabinet seemed the obvious place to start. I pulled open the top drawer and found folders organized by year. Nothing about insurance policy changes or bylaw amendments from last year. Hours passed as I searched. Night fell, and my eyes grew tired from reading faded documents by lamplight. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a loose section in the desk blotter. When I lifted it, there was a small envelope taped underneath. Inside the envelope, I found a USB drive with a sticky note attached. Hurricane insurance evidence, in case Victoria tries something. My hands shook as I plugged it into Mom's laptop. The drive contained dozens of documents, the original master insurance policy showing full hurricane coverage, email exchanges between board members discussing how to divert insurance funds, and most damning of all, bank statements showing where the hurricane insurance premiums had actually gone. They never amended the hurricane coverage, I whispered to myself. They've been pocketing the difference. According to these records, the HOA had been collecting insurance premiums but had downgraded the actual policy through. The difference, nearly $200,000 annually, had been redirected to special projects that seemed to mainly benefit properties owned by board members and their friends. Sleep evaded me that night. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, comparing the official documents with what Mom had uncovered. Victoria and her board allies had systematically misled the community, collecting full premiums while secretly reducing coverage. When Hurricane Elena hit, instead of admitting their scheme, they were forcing homeowners to pay personally, hoping no one would discover the truth. At dawn, I knew what I had to do. First, I needed a lawyer. Then I needed to understand exactly what Victoria Winters and her OA board were trying to hide before tonight's meeting. If they thought they could steal from my mother and her neighbors, they were about to learn a painful lesson. I folded Mom's notes and put them in my pocket. "I won't let you down," I whispered to the empty room. Little did Victoria know, she hadn't just messed with a grieving daughter. She'd walked straight into a trap set by my mother, who'd anticipated her moves even from beyond the grave. I didn't sleep that night. By 8 a.m., I waited outside the office of Richard Thornton, the only insurance attorney in Coastal County. His secretary looked surprised when I asked for an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. "So you believe the HOA is fraudulently denying hurricane damage claims?" Richard said, after I explained my situation. He was younger than I expected, with a neatly trimmed beard and a bow tie that seemed incongruous with his otherwise modern appearance. I spread the documents across his desk. "These are the original insurance policies from 3 years ago, and here are the bank records showing continued collection of full hurricane insurance premiums." Richard studied both sets of papers, tracing his finger along the numbers. His eyebrows rose higher with each passing minute. "This is highly unusual," he finally said. "According to these documents, your HOA has been collecting premiums for coverage they secretly reduced. The actual policy coverage was cut in half, while homeowners continued paying full price. That would constitute insurance fraud, and now they're telling everyone they have to pay out of pocket for hurricane repairs," I finished for him. Richard removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "A fraud case of this magnitude won't be simple. We need to understand their exact scheme before confronting them." He called the state insurance commissioner's office, putting the call on speaker. After navigating a maze of departments, we learned something shocking. The HOA's insurance broker had filed a complaint last year after being suddenly replaced. The broker questioned why they were downgrading coverage in a high-risk hurricane zone, Richard explained after hanging up. He was fired for raising concerns. "What can we do?" I asked. "File a formal complaint with the insurance commissioner immediately. But first, we need more ammunition." I drove to the county records office and requested everything they had on Coastal Palms HOA. Hours later, hidden in a quiet corner of the library with stacks of public records, I discovered gold. Coastal Palms wasn't just a condominium complex. It was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies. The same 5 names appeared throughout: Victoria Winters, her husband James Winters, the property manager Robert Phillips, the HOA treasurer Diana Lopez, and the maintenance supervisor Carl Brooks. But the most interesting document was from just 6 months ago, a loan approval for $1.2 million to renovate Victoria's private real estate company offices. with Coastal Palms reserve funds listed as collateral. They weren't just skimming insurance money, they were leveraging the entire community's financial security for personal gain. I took photos of everything with my phone and headed to my next stop, the offices of the Coastal County Chronicle. The editor, Tom Sullivan, had interviewed my mother several times for community stories. When I told him I was investigating potential fraud involving the Coastal Palms HOA, his journalistic instincts perked up. "I can't publish accusations without evidence," he warned, "but I can look into the approval process for these insurance changes." It did seem strange how quickly they recovered from previous hurricane damage in certain sections of the property. Back at Mom's condo, I found Mrs. Delgado talking to another longtime resident. "Mr. Garcia was just telling me about his experience on the maintenance committee," she said meaningfully. Mr. Garcia's face darkened when I mentioned Victoria Winters. "That woman is the reason I resigned from the committee," he said bitterly. 3 years ago, they started cutting corners on all repairs. When I questioned the reduced hurricane strapping during the last roof replacement, Victoria had me removed, said I was creating unnecessary anxiety among residents. "How many others noticed these issues?" I asked. "At least a dozen owners raised concerns over the last few years. Always brushed aside, always told it was being handled according to code. But I was a building inspector for 30 years before retiring. I know when work isn't up to standard." A pattern emerged. Reduce coverage secretly, cut corners on maintenance and repairs, pocket the difference, and silence anyone who asks questions. Hurricane Elena had simply exposed their schemes sooner than they'd anticipated. My phone rang. "Richard Thornton, my attorney. The judge granted our emergency injunction," he said. "The HOA cannot demand payment from homeowners for roof repairs until a hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a small victory. I drove to the community center with the court order in hand. Workers were setting up chairs for the evening meeting when I arrived. Victoria's Mercedes still sat in her reserved parking space. She came out as I approached, phone to her ear as usual. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "All damage assessment meetings are postponed," I said, handing her the court order. "Insurance coverage is in dispute." She scanned the document, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "This is ridiculous. We have every approval we need. Based on fraudulent policies, Mrs. Winters. I have the original coverage documents and the financial records." For the first time, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold determination. "This little stunt will cost you," she said quietly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do. 5 names on dozens of business filings, $1.2 million in personal loans using HOA funds as collateral, insurance premiums collected for coverage that was secretly reduced." My mother documented everything. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "We can be reasonable. Perhaps you'd consider selling your mother's unit? Above market value, of course. Immediate payment. Not interested. Everyone has a price." Her smile returned, confident and predatory. "Think about it. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old condo? It was my mother's home. It's not for sale." I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, "The insurance commissioner plays golf with my husband. The building inspector is my brother-in-law. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town." I drove away, her words echoing in my mind. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider here now, but she'd overlooked something important. Mom hadn't been. She'd lived in Coastal Palms for 15 years, knew everyone, and was respected even by those who disagreed with her. And she'd left me more than just a condo. Back at Mom's place, I returned to her office. If she had anticipated this fight, what else had she prepared? I searched more carefully, examining every folder, every notebook. In an album labeled Board Meetings 2020-2022, I found dozens of photos Mom had taken secretly during meetings, showing board members passing notes and text messages when official votes were being taken. Each photo had dates, times, and context written on the back. These weren't just memories, they were evidence of open meeting violations. People who might stand with me against Victoria Winters and her corrupt board. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Improper window covering violation at your unit. Fine. $100. Coastal Palms HOA compliance." Attached was a photo of my mother's perfectly standard beige curtains. This was how it started. The pattern of harassment Mr. Garcia had described. Victoria was sending a message, beginning her campaign of intimidation. But unlike the others, I knew their game now and had something they didn't expect. Mom's meticulous documentation of their years of misconduct, still hidden in her files, waiting for the right moment. As night fell over Coastal Palms, I sat on the balcony where Mom used to watch the sunset. The damaged roofs loomed in the darkness, blue tarps flapping gently in the sea breeze. Construction equipment sat idle under the court order. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow Victoria would mobilize her connections. The real fight was coming. What she didn't realize was that I'd found more than just insurance records in Mom's hidden USB drive. I'd found documents that didn't just question the policy changes. They revealed who had falsified them, when, and why. Victoria thought she was dealing with an absent daughter fighting for sentimental property. She had no idea she was facing the ghost of my mother, who had documented every shady deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently building a case while they thought she was just a nosy old woman. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk further into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of Coastal Palms Community Center. Tonight was the night I'd been planning for all week. Inside, nearly 100 residents filled rows of folding chairs. They chatted nervously about repair costs and insurance claims while sipping punch from small plastic cups. At the front, Victoria Winters stood tall in her bright blue blazer, pointing at colorful pictures of roof repairs on a screen. "Just imagine the upgraded architectural shingles," she said, smiling wide at the crowd. "Our homes will be worth so much more once these premium materials are installed. Yes, there's an out-of-pocket cost, but the investment in your property values." People shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered about second mortgages and depleted savings accounts. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to make heads turn. "I need to speak about this insurance situation." Victoria's smile dropped for a second, then returned faker than before. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait," I replied, stepping onto the small stage. I faced the curious crowd. "My name is Sarah Davidson. My mother, Margaret, owned Unit 307 for 15 years. The repairs you're being asked to pay for should be covered by the hurricane insurance we've all been paying for." "As I've explained," Victoria cut in quickly, "our policy has exclusions for named storms. The bylaws clearly state, this is the master insurance policy from 3 years ago," I said, holding up a document. "And these are the bank statements showing continued collection of full hurricane coverage premiums. According to these documents, we are all fully covered for hurricane damage, including roof replacement." I turned to face the HOA board members seated in a row behind the podium. I placed copies in front of each of them. "Put simply," I continued, "you've been paying for hurricane coverage that the board secretly reduced while continuing to collect your money." The room exploded with voices. People stood up. Someone knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Victoria shouted, grabbing one of the documents. "We have a legal opinion. The policy terms were modified according to industry standards." I stayed calm while she grew redder. "Your legal opinion came from your husband's law firm," I said. "And the industry standards doesn't explain where the extra $200,000 in annual premiums went." Diana Lopez, the HOA treasurer, studied the bank statements with growing panic. "Victoria," she whispered, loudly enough for the microphone to catch, "these withdrawal amounts match what we've been transferring to the special projects account." Victoria yanked the papers from her hands. "This is clearly some kind of trick to delay necessary repairs," she said. "We'll fight this nonsense." "You're welcome to try," I replied, pulling out one final document. "But here's something you should know. According to the state insurance code, directors who knowingly misrepresent coverage to homeowners can be personally liable for damages. That means your personal assets, Victoria. Your house, your cars, your investment properties." The room went completely quiet. People looked at each other, suddenly understanding what this meant. They might not have to pay thousands for roof repairs after all. A man in the back stood up. "Are you saying we've been covered this whole time?" Before I could answer, Victoria slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out. The board needs to discuss this privately." As people shuffled out, whispering nervously, an elderly woman touched my arm. "I'm Betty Williams. I just paid $8,000 from my retirement savings for roof repairs last week. What happens to me?" I hadn't expected to face the human cost so directly. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone who's already paid," I told her honestly. "This is about fixing a wrong for everyone." "Don't listen to a word," Victoria hissed, suddenly beside us. After everyone else left, she leaned close to my face. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I built Coastal Palms from nothing. Nobody takes it from me." Her threat hung in the air between us as she stormed off, leaving me alone in the empty room. Through the windows, I could see clusters of worried homeowners in the parking lot. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "How did it go?" I typed back, "They know now. Get ready for their next move." What I didn't tell him was how shaken I felt. I had lit the fuse, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just paper policies and bank statements. They were people's homes and savings. But Victoria and her board had stolen from these people for years, leaving them vulnerable when disaster struck. Someone would end up losing everything, and Victoria Winters wasn't going to go down without a fight. I jerked awake to the sound of drilling outside my mother's condo. Bright lights flooded through the windows. I stumbled to the balcony to find 3 white pickup trucks with Coastal Palms Maintenance painted on their doors parked in a row. Men in uniforms were installing metal hurricane shutters over my windows and doors. One worker stepped forward, handing me a thick envelope. "Mandatory hurricane protection installation," he said flatly. "Approved by the board last night. Your unit has been designated high risk. $3,200 will be added to your monthly assessment." I tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter claiming my mother's unit had substandard storm protection that required immediate remediation at my expense. "You can't be serious," I said. "This is clearly retaliation." The man shrugged. "Just following orders. Have a nice day." He returned to supervising the installation, but none of them stopped working. I tried to leave for breakfast, but discovered they had placed scaffolding blocking my door for safety during installation. I was effectively trapped in my own home. I called the sheriff's office but was told they couldn't help with a civil HOA dispute and suggested I take it up with the board. My phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. "Good morning," she said sweetly when I answered. "Enjoying the upgrades?" "This is harassment," I said. "You can't trap me in my home. Actually, according to HOA emergency powers during disaster recovery, we can authorize any safety measure deemed necessary. Your unit was flagged for immediate hurricane shutter installation. We're just looking out for your protection." I felt my stomach drop as she continued. "Let me explain how this works. The building inspector will be visiting your unit tomorrow to check for water. The fire marshal might need to verify your smoke detectors. The health department is concerned about possible mold in units with roof damage. Every one of them is a personal friend." "That's illegal," I said. "Community protection," she replied. "You can't win this, but I'm reasonable. Drop your claims, destroy those documents, and this all goes away. I'll even waive the installation fee as a gesture of goodwill." "This isn't about money," I told her. "It's always about money, dear. Think it over. You have until tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at my phone, then at the workers continuing to install shutters I never requested. They weren't leaving. True to Victoria's word, by afternoon, a county inspector arrived to examine the condo. He found problems with everything: the electrical outlets, the water heater, the balcony railing. He handed me a list of violations that would cost thousands to fix, all needed immediately. As he left, another truck arrived. Workers put up safety assessment zone tape across my parking space. My assigned spot suddenly became reserved for HOA emergency personnel. When I tried ordering groceries for delivery, the guard at the community entrance called to say they'd been instructed not to allow delivery services to my unit due to construction safety concerns. I was being isolated, step by step. That night, I sat in darkness, the new hurricane shutters blocking even moonlight from entering. The drilling had finally stopped, but Victoria's message was clear. She could make my life unbearable. My phone lit up with a message from Richard. "They've filed a restraining order claiming you're harassing board members. Court date set for next week. They're also claiming your mother was mentally incompetent when she collected those documents. By next week, Victoria would have time to destroy evidence and further intimidate residents. The damage would be done." I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone who might help. A name caught my eye: Michael Chen, an investigative reporter for the regional news station. We'd gone to college together. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but maybe. As I considered calling him, headlights appeared in the parking lot. A car carefully maneuvered around the maintenance trucks and approached the building. I tensed, wondering what new trouble Victoria was sending my way. The car parked, and a familiar figure stepped out: Diana Lopez, the HOA treasurer who had panicked during the meeting. "I shouldn't be here," she said nervously, glancing back at the maintenance trucks in the distance. "If Victoria finds out..." "Why are you here?" I asked. She pulled out a flash drive from her pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't right. I've been keeping the HOA books for 5 years. There are things you should see. I invited her inside, away from watching eyes. At my kitchen table, she opened her laptop and showed me financial records, meeting minutes, and emails. Victoria and certain board members had been using HOA funds like their personal bank account, special assessments that disappeared, contracts that went to family members, reserve funds invested in private businesses. Why show me this? I asked. Because I'm not the only unhappy board member, Diana explained. Many of us were pressured into voting Victoria's way. When you showed up with those insurance documents, it was the first time I've seen her scared. She pointed to a spreadsheet. Look at these special assessments from last year. Every homeowner paid $1,500 for hurricane preparedness. The actual supplies and preparations cost less than a third that amount. The rest vanished. That's theft, I said. Diana nodded. And there's more. The roof repairs Victoria is making everyone pay for? The insurance claim was actually filed. The insurance company approved partial coverage, but Victoria told everyone it was denied completely. As we talked, my phone buzzed with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. We believe you. The Andersons, Unit 412. We were charged $12,000 for repairs. Victoria threatened to lien my property when I questioned the special assessments. Can we help? James Morgan, Unit 205. Our elderly parents paid their life savings for unnecessary repairs. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguez family. Diana smiled slightly. I may have shared your number with a few friends. For the first time since this battle began, I felt hope. Victoria had power, connections, and money. But she had also made enemies. Many of them. We need a plan, I said, and I think I know where to start. As Diana left, carefully driving past the maintenance trucks, I watched the workers beginning to pack up their equipment for the night. Victoria thought she was punishing me into submission. Instead, she had just helped me find the allies I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would stop playing defense. Mom always said, the best trap isn't one your enemy walks into, it's one they help you build without knowing it. Victoria had just handed me the final pieces I needed. My water got shut off the next morning. The electricity followed that afternoon. I stood in Mom's kitchen looking at spoiled food in the warm refrigerator. Victoria Winters thought she could bully me off my own property by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and headed out. If Victoria wanted war, I needed an army. The first person I visited was Mrs. Delgado, who answered her door in a flowered housecoat. They shut off your utilities? She gasped. That's illegal. So is insurance fraud, I replied. But Victoria has friends at the utilities department. I need to know who else might hate the board as much as we do. Mrs. Delgado's eyes lit up. Oh, honey, grab a chair. This might take a while. She gave me 20 families who'd been fined for unapproved hurricane shutters. Elderly couples threatened with liens for having grandchildren visit too long. A single dad who couldn't afford the $1. 200 special assessment for lobby renovations that never happened. I spent the entire day knocking on doors throughout Coastal Palms. At first, people were scared to talk, but when I showed them the insurance documents and bank records, something changed. Hope replaced fear. Janet Morris, whose balcony plants had been forcibly removed, invited me in for lemonade. Victoria made my husband dig up our orchids because they weren't on the approved plant list. We got a $350 fine. The Patel family had spent $5,000 fighting the HOA over their accessibility ramp. The Johnsons couldn't paint their door the color they wanted. Every condo looked exactly the same, beige with white trim. It's not just the rules, Trevor Martinez explained while his wife Maria nodded. It's how they enforce them. Victoria targets people she doesn't like. Some people get warnings, others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By sunset, I'd talked to 35 families, all with similar stories, all afraid of Victoria Winters. I picked up my phone and called Richard, my attorney. Can we legally form a competing HOA board? I asked. Absolutely, he replied. In fact, if you can get enough signatures, you can call for a special election to replace the current board. The bylaws allow for it if there's evidence of financial misconduct. What about the insurance situation? That's where it gets interesting, Richard said. I spoke with the state insurance commissioner this morning. They're very interested in the documents you provided. They've opened a formal investigation. I hung up and started drafting a notice. Emergency community meeting, your insurance coverage and HOA fees, the truth revealed. The next day, I printed 150 flyers and recruited volunteers to place them on every door. By evening, the small cafe across from Coastal Palms was packed beyond capacity. 68 unit owners showed up, more than enough for a quorum under the bylaws. Victoria arrived last, pushing through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "This meeting is unauthorized. Everyone needs to leave immediately." Janet Morris stood up. "Or what? More fines? Haven't you taken enough from us already?" The room erupted in applause. I walked to the front, holding up my hands for quiet. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," I began. "I came because my mother discovered that our insurance premiums were being misused. But after meeting all of you, I realized I'm not the only victim." For the next hour, residents shared stories of HOA abuse. Tears flowed. Voices shook with emotion. Victoria sat stiffly in the back, tapping furiously on her phone. "Here's what I propose," I said when everyone had spoken. "We form a new Coastal Palms Residents Coalition. Together, we demand a full audit of HOA finances, restoration of our proper insurance coverage, and an emergency election for new board leadership." "You can't do that," Victoria shouted. "These units are bound by contract to the existing HOA structure." I held up the financial records Diana had provided. "Contracts require good faith, Miss Winters. Financial fraud invalidates your authority." The vote was nearly unanimous. 59 families joined the coalition on the spot. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, Michael Chen, the reporter I'd contacted, approached me privately. "I've been recording the whole meeting," he whispered. "This is exactly the kind of community story we're looking for. I've also been researching Victoria's connections at City Hall." "What have you found?" I asked. "The insurance broker who was fired last year. He's willing to go on camera about how Victoria pressured him to reduce coverage while keeping premiums the same. This is going to make the evening news." Victoria stormed over, pointing her finger in my face. "You've made it terrible. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever coming to Coastal Palms." "Is that a threat, Mrs. Winters?" "It's a promise. I have the county commissioner, the utility board, and 3 bank presidents on speed dial. This little rebellion ends now." What she didn't know was that I'd invited Michael to sit quietly in the back of the meeting. Every word had been recorded, every threat documented. As Victoria slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Judge Hernandez granted our emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. The insurance commissioner is sending an investigator." I smiled. Victoria thought she had all the power, but Mom always said the truth was the most powerful weapon of all. And tomorrow, the truth about Coastal Palms HOA would be exposed for everyone to see. I woke up to police cars surrounding the community cafe where we'd held our meeting. Through the window of Mom's condo, I spotted Victoria standing next to a tall man in uniform. Time to face the music. "You're being cited for unauthorized public assembly," the police captain announced as I approached. "The HOA has exclusive rights to community meetings." I smiled calmly. "Actually, Captain Rodriguez, I believe you'll find we were exercising our right to free assembly on private property with the owner's permission." I handed him a folder containing our coalition bylaws and the cafe owner's written authorization. "These documents haven't been verified," Victoria snapped. "She's trying to stage a hostile takeover of a legally established homeowners association." A woman stepped forward from a car I hadn't noticed. "Rebecca Martinez, State Insurance Commissioner's Office. We've received concerning reports about Coastal Palms HOA's insurance practices." Victoria's face went pale. "What reports?" I gestured toward the community center. "Perhaps we should discuss this inside." "Coffee's ready." 15 minutes later, my kitchen table held an unexpected gathering. The police captain, the insurance investigator, Richard, my attorney, and Victoria, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. "The hurricane insurance policy was properly modified," Victoria insisted, spreading papers across the table. "All procedures were followed." "Then why weren't homeowners notified of the reduced coverage?" Rebecca asked, reviewing the documents. "They were. We sent notices. Yet we have 67 signed statements from homeowners confirming they never received such notification," Richard said, sliding a thick folder toward the investigator. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "This is a conspiracy to undermine legitimate HOA authority." "Speaking of authority," I said, pulling out my laptop, "Diana Lopez provided some interesting financial records yesterday."